Good evening, everyone. I'm Gayatri Uppal, and I work as Associate Director at the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, also known as SSAF. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation to this evening's event, the grantee announcement of the 2022 SSAF Installation Art Grant. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our jury for the grant, Reem Fadda, who's the jury chair, Suresh BV, and Natasha Jinwala, who are jury members. The grantee announcement will be preceded by a lecture by Reem Fadda titled Sarab, Chimes for Living Art. It's being chaired by Sabi Ahmed. The SSAF Installation Art Grant is premised on the fact that Indian art has been energized since the 1990s by what is broadly termed installation art, but that there has been limited infrastructural and institutional support for such projects. SSAF will support an individual artist or an artist collective with a grant of up to 8 lakhs to conceptualize and produce a new work within the broad parameters of installation art. Sahaj Rahul was the recipient of the inaugural SSAF Installation Art Grant in 2019 for his project titled Ancestors. The project is currently being exhibited at the Jahangir Nicholson Art Foundation, JNAF, at the CSMVS, Mumbai, and is on view till May 8th. To briefly introduce SSAF, it was established in 2016 with the mandate to carry forward the legacy of scholar and photographer Umrao Singh Sher-Gil, his daughter and a pioneering figure of modern Indian art, Amrita Sher-Gil, and her nephew and niece, artist Vivan Sundaram, and filmmaker and television journalist Navina Sundaram. Since its inception, the foundation's mandate has been to support and enable conjunctions of artistic and cultural practice that deal with historical memory with a view towards building futures based on secular principles and freedom of expression. SSAF is committed to advancing creative independence and supporting alternative and heterodox practices. And I encourage you to visit our website, ssaf.in, to learn more about our programs. This evening's discussion is being chaired by Sabi Ahmed, Associate Director and Curator at the Ishara Art Foundation in Dubai. His curatorial work and research focus on modern and contemporary art of South Asia through diverse itineraries, languages, and interdisciplinary formations. Prior to Ishara, Ahmed was a senior researcher and project manager at Asia Art Archive from 2009 to 2019, a visiting faculty at the Ambedkar University, Delhi, and involved in independent curatorial projects that include being a curatorial collegiate member of the 11th Shanghai Biennale, curated by Rux Media Collective. His writings have been featured in academic publications and journals, and he's on the advisory board of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation in Delhi. A few technical points about this evening's event. We request you to keep your audio and video off and would like to inform you that this session is being recorded. The lecture will be for 45 minutes and there will be a discussion and Q&A of 15 to 20 minutes. We request you to type your questions or comments in the chat box during as well as after the discussion, which Sabi will be taking as they come in. The grantee announcement of the 2022 SSAF Installation Art Grant will be made by the jury chair, Reem Fadda, and jury members, Suresh BV and Natasha Jinwala, after the lecture and discussion concludes. I will now hand over to Sabi Ahmed to introduce Reem Fadda and to commence the program. Over to you, Sabi.
Thank you, Gayatri. And welcome everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It gives me great pleasure to chair the SSAF Installation Art Grant 2022 lecture that is being delivered by Reem Fadda this evening. And as Gayatri has already laid out the program, Reem will be delivering her lecture for 45 minutes. This will be followed by a 15 to 20 minute Q&A that I will be chairing. And then we'll hand it over again to Gayatri and the SSAF members. Just to quickly introduce Reem, who is the jury chair this year. She's a curator and art historian. She worked at the Guggenheim Museum as Associate Curator of Middle Eastern Art Abu Dhabi project from 2010 to 2016. And I should add that her work there has really complicated and expanded those geographic nomenclatures to include North Africa, South Asia, and West Asia, against the usual nomenclature of Middle Eastern art. From 2005 to 2007, Reem was director of the Palestinian Association for Contemporary Art, the PACA in Ramallah, and served as the academic director of the International Academy of Art Palestine, also in Ramallah. She has curated several international exhibitions and biennales, including Jerusalem Lives, the Palestinian Museum Birzeit in 2017, the 6th Marrakesh Biennale in 2016 titled Not New Now, and the United Arab Emirates National Pavilion and 55th Venice Biennale in 2013. Fadda was awarded the 8th Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement in 2017 and the 2019 Fellow for the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum. She currently works as Director of Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi. Before handing it over to Reem, I'd like to highlight a few areas of her curatorial practice that have been particularly powerful and reverberating with the urgency several colleagues and friends of my own share. Firstly, that her work over the past decade, through her work over the past decade, she has been an advocate for art that engages with political and social urgencies of our time. Working closely within and around the context of Palestine, it goes without saying that the politics of occupation and a claim to free thought, free life, has been at the heart of much of her work. This also translates to an extended understanding of colonialism and post-colonialism, where colonialism quite literally is not a thing of the past, but present with the settler colonial brutality we continue to see in present-day Palestine by Israel. The centrality of political and social engagement in contemporary art, according to Reem, is the Global South's foundational contribution to 20th and 21st century art history. I remember her saying during her Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement in 2017, the lecture she presented there, that formalism is not enough. Formalism here obviously signifying that, which was central to the legacy of Western modernism. Another important area of her curatorial work has been her dedication to art that claims the public sphere. Not necessarily public art, but forms of art making that bring about a direct encounter with society, as well as the infrastructure of exhibitionary practices. This was particularly highlighted in the Marrakesh Biennale she curated. And this really leads to the thinking of infrastructure both politically and aesthetically, which I think is very apt for the installation grant that we're going to be speaking about today. So on that note, over to you, Reem. I'm going to switch my mic and video off, but I'm going to be timekeeping. So 5 minutes before your 45 minutes are up, I'm going to switch on the mic and interrupt you as gently as I could. Over to you.
You definitely need to do that for sure. Sabih, thank you. That it was one of the most generous introductions I've received. And thank you for the Sher-Gil Sundaram Foundation for this kind invitation, because I mean, I've long been a friend and at the same time a mentee of Vivan and Geeta Kapoor, but I'm also thankful for them for keeping me at link with my extended community in India. And I feel that through them, I've been able to keep abreast with a lot of the artistic practices and stay linked both in an urgent need for these cultural continuities to prosper and complement each other for sure. And it gives me great pleasure to be the chair of the jury for this grant this year. Delving into my lecture for this evening, which for many of you who know me, I am, I'm not the kind that will write a lecture and read from a paper. What you will hear are thoughts and ruminations, and I think many of which are my angst and my anxieties and my conflicting ideas that I carry on with me in my practice. I'm going to walk you through some of these thoughts. Bear with me that some of them are might feel disjointed, but I promise you in the end, it'll make sense. I have a presentation of visuals that, after these various thoughts that I talked to you through, I would like to show it to you as demonstrative of my practice, of my most recent exhibition. The lecture's title is Sarab, Chimes for Living Art, or Living Things. And basically, it really, I will be showcasing the exhibition that I just recently did in Al Ula in Desert, as part of Desert X, entitled Sarab. So that's where it really kind of showcases a lot of installation art in very public locations. But to start, to really kind of start off some of my thinking for the purposes of this session, the primary thought that really has been crossing my mind is that we are living in an acute sense of alienation at this time and present moment. Maybe it's post-COVID, maybe it's the culmination of many things, the draw into the digital sphere, but how do we really face off this era of alienation? How do we do so in contemporary art practice, in cultural advocacy, through the means of our institutions, through the means of social action? How does this alienation start to diminish? It has become basically the thesis for the death of community. We are approaching it in a constant way. And how have we become complicit in our artistic practices in cultivating and furthering this sense of aloofness and solitude? We've used terminologies before, such as contemplation, imagination, individuality, genius, and they have become complicit and implicated in this collective philosophy of erosion for this kind of community. But how do we safeguard these important achievements in artistic practice? I mean, it's no little thing to acknowledge that arriving to ideas such as imagination, contemplation, individuality, and genius is also an accomplishment for our humanity. But how does it serve our communities? How does it become, what are the mechanisms? What are the conceptual frameworks that we can use in artistic practice, in socially urgent practices of culture that safeguard them and at the same time enable them to allow for more distinct voices of our community to come to the rise? I think, we have to, I mean, there's a point where there is issues such as care and sympathy have to become introduced in our new lexicon. And here, care is not for the care of objects, which I've constantly advocated for, but it is turning the lens to our societies and our people, and giving back to a sense of spiritual nourishment and creating a sense of wonder and a democratization for the ideas of both awe and splendor. So these experiences, they really are in a need for a place where our societies and our people can relate to them, where there is an access to them. And furthermore, I have debated this issue of public art, and I have constantly debated this issue of placement of art, of its also its relationship to place, to people, and trying to pull from that a sense of why is this art actually there, and what's the purpose of it all in the end of the day. And from that confrontation and from these ideas, I have interrogated the issue of public at large. And for me, I mean, I've tried to come to terms with thinking about both the museum, the white space, interrogating them. And I've constantly felt that they are, they hold within them, of course, notions of the industrial, notions of basically something that is synthetic, that goes against the grain of the naturalness that comes with the creative process, with both the artistic process that roots itself in more urgent matters for community and society. And these are, you know, especially in our current moment and in our current time, how can we create experiences to safeguard that artistic practice? And I'm very much someone who, yes, definitely has had a very important standpoint saying that form is not the most important thing, but it's acutely aware, I'm acutely aware that form is necessary in the making of visual vocabularies that add something to our lives and in our visual vernacular. So the aesthetic process is equally important. The final visual element is equally important. How does the manifestations of them, how do artists appropriate places that make it, that allow for the sense of agency and allow for a sense of exhibitions and in many ways creating a sovereignty for these artistic practices away from a lot of the sense of confinement that we see in institutional setups or in the white cube setup or in those redundant these redundant kind of spaces at this time and place. And for that, you've seen this across the years. I have done a lot of art in very public locations, and I've advocated for a sense of where that art takes ownership in something very natural, in locations that have a constitution for living aspects. And I've talked before, but I constantly have wanted to push the element of the living furthermore in my own individual practice, in the curatorial practice. And I've called for living art as a way, as a nomenclature for our times, because at the same time, in all these aspects, living art is that urgent sense of pushing for that which is the advocacy of people, of the communities. It really brings in a sense where artists can respond to their surroundings, to the ecological, which is now a huge topic, but at the same time, something that the artists have long been debating and anchoring and really advocating for across the years. And this is something that as intellectuals, they've taken a big role in. And that relationship to nature, to the environment, it's a cyclical turn that, between these various elements that have created something that I find to be unique in various creative practices. And for that purpose, I've long wanted to do art that is not confined in the white cube, not confined in the museum. And it's of course strange because I work in spaces that are institutions, but I mean, at least in my current state with the Cultural Foundation, it has a lack of white spaces, which I'm quite proud of. It's more of open atrium spaces that bleed into public spheres and public squares. And it looks like even just areas of kind of areas of congregations or hallways. And that sense only gives me further pleasure to feel that the art that I display in these institutions or in this place is only a pathway for people to encounter. They don't have to come in a sense of, the visitorship that, I have to say that there's a level of like just being able to see the art in our surroundings in a way that we encounter things in our living moments. They are not necessarily deliberate. And that also brings me a sense of joy. And I don't count the visitorship as that which has the deliberate aspect only, because our moments of art that come with encounters becomes maybe even more impactful for a lot of our communities. And from that end, I was recently invited to curate a public art demonstration entitled Desert X that follows suit from a project that happened in LA. And for Desert X, and for people who don't know this and don't know the context, it's in Al-Ula, in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, a very I want to say it's more village-like setup in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, of course, has been in the limelight for many good and bad reasons, as we're all aware. But I have to say that there's a sense of urgency also in the community there for conversations with art and opening up to the world. And this is something where I feel responsible as being part of that larger Arab fabric to respond to and be a part of that conversation. And Saudi Arabia is 35 million people with a lot of youth and a lot of anguish, and at the same time hopefulness that is coming from this large country. So in responding to Al-Ula, I was presented to, I've been there before, and I know the space. I know how quite spectacular that that natural reserve has been, and it's a place of pure joy and imagination, and it's something that I thought would be quite remarkable to see the marriage of art, of artists in that kind of landscape, and what the results of that. What would be the results of such encounters? What can it bring to the fold? And in this aspect, we were able to invite. There was a deliberate choice, and this is something that is imposed by the institution to bring in a majority of Saudi and regional artists, and at the same time, and they did not define the region. They were happy with my concentration of looking at large at West Asia and Africa, and at the same time, they had also international participants coming into this exhibition. There, we invited around 15 artists for the purpose of this exhibition of Desert X, and the first thing that, in thinking about the concepts and the ruminations around me in Al-Ula, the most important and pertinent questions that came to the fore were issues, of course, of nature and our relationship to that place, this virgin, incredible location. And you'll be seeing it very shortly with the images, I promise you. And the idea of something that haunted me was the thing that kept on nagging at me, this sense of haunting. And I wanted to, I zoned in on the idea of sarab, Sarab in Arabic means mirage. The mirage, as we all know, is the appearance of water from the distance, and or the appearance of something coveted, and this inability to harness it. And I thought, how appropriate is thinking about this in the middle of the desert landscape, where, you know, this is a place lush with other riches, from oil to thinking of mining, of stone mining, gas mining, resource mining, but at the same time there's a lot of oases in Al-Ula, and this same dichotomy of the oases and Sarab became something quite introspective for me, from these natural elements to think of the problematic, the variable of man and nature in this situation, and to reflect on it in our artistic practice and in our own worlds and in our own minds. How do we create an artistic practice that comes with humility in a place like this? How does it bow to nature? How does it lend itself a servant for nature? How does it also allow for nature to be the master, and dictate what it requires? How do we also indicate and talk about this important issue of the race of man to conquer, to develop, to think of growth, all these words that are synonymous to destruction, to thinking of disservice to our planet at large, to thinking about a disservice to our humanity and to our community. So from that point of time, I understood that even when I am in the desert landscape and there is absolute solitude, the idea of quietness is quite significant in that desert landscape. There is something that is there is no alienation. And that is a moment for, that was the moment for my understanding that place, matter, people, communities, you know, and of course nature are hinged in a larger phenomenological order that we need to look into, consider at all stages of times, from the artistic practice to the exhibitionary methods, to the institutional support, to think of all of these equations simultaneously at all points in time in order to achieve thinking about where we create a sense of agency, and we create a sense of a response that matters to our surroundings in equal measure. I mean, I'm talking in a very abstract way, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that people begin to see my, I mean, as part of really thinking about, again, this kind of space of contradiction in the desert. You know, it's a place where mirage and disappearance and illusion and all of these kind of harsh realities all cohabit and shape the struggle for the people around them. And that specific place is quite remarkable to see. The community there is very, very active. It's very active in promoting at the same time tourism, because they have incredible heritage sites. But these heritage sites are a place of living. I mean, these are the parks for people. They go there for alongside etchings that are millennia old. People sit there and congregate and go on their outings with their families. So these places have become, you know, from this idea of the heterotopia, this has become a very abundant place for living spaces, and that's a place where I thought these contradictions really allow to think about new mechanisms to think about how artistic practice can learn from these situations. It's, you know, it's a place where at the same time thinking about, you know, survival is equal to thinking about perseverance and the wealth of the surroundings. I mean, they come hand in hand, but there's a sense of equity that permeates everything. It's not a sense of domination, and this abundance and let's say lack of abundance of nature, but at the same time the spectacularness of the situation around allows for this the sense of serenity, the sense of awe, and I think this obsession with controlling nature subsides, and there's much to learn about that in our ways of being, for our communities, for going back to nature, for thinking about our artistic practices across the broader sense. So, I mean, we're starting here by, you know, seeing aspects of a lot of the installations that took place in Desert X. Starting with this piece by, and of course the landscape, as you see it, is full of these gorges, these mountainous areas, and they're surrounded, as I mentioned, with oases, but there are these gorges of mountains and volcanic in nature from the beginning of like time, and quite incredible in a complete sand, in a sand desert landscape. The artwork you see here is by the artist Serge Atukwe-Clotti, Gold Falls. And if we can go to the second and third image of specifically this, I mean, you can see the scale here of this project. And I want to say that these projects are not meant to be for all time. So they are, you know, they're installed in these spaces. The area is conserved and thought of in a very in absolute. I mean, we had experts, geological experts, and people to tell us where are the safeguarded kind of landscapes and where we can actually apply the art to the certain landscapes. And it was done with utmost care for everything that was there. And you know, I was trying in my conversations with the artists to bring something that was both intrinsic to their communities at large, and bring them back. I mean, many of these artists, when they visited the place, were, you know, in awe and didn't know how to respond. It needed a moment of retreat to think back and to think about what was appropriate, and to bring that back into these installations. What you see here for Serge's work in particular is these are bottle caps. These are the kefir bottles. These are gallons of water bottles that are from oil companies that are discarded, and then they are utilized by the communities in Ghana, in Accra, Ghana, across all the villages, and people use them to transport water wherever they can attain it. And of course, we're talking about contamination, we're talking about pollution, we are talking about people's livelihoods. And what's amazing about Serge's practice here is him and his entire community, they've worked together on weaving these sections of these various bottled water bottles into these pieces of fabric in no shape and form. And these pieces of fabric are things that he's used both, of course, to demonstrate with. He's used it in areas to demarcate land even, because there are waves of migration that happen, and him and his own family have been displaced from one area to the other with no deeds of land or ownership. And he's used these fabrics, these made up fabrics between him, his family, his entire village community, to talk about a sense of urgency and ownership, and at the same time to draw attention to their plights in lack of resources and all. And this artist, we conceived of this project on the rocks, and it's an amalgamated form, and it's very crude when you come close to it, but it really kind of shines across with the sunlight and everything in various times of the day. And he intended it to be like a waterfall. And of course, he plays with the idea that it's gold falls, and it's no play on words that, there's a reference here to the lack of water, but at the same time to abundance in a place like Saudi or else of wealth, and the distinctions that happen to places like Ghana. But it was a moment of triumph for the artist at the same time. If we can move to the next slide. This is Claudia Comte, Dark Suns, Bright Waves. And what we see here is these sensory walls that she's created, drawings on these walls that reverberate sound, elements of heat, and they are very visceral in the way you experience them. When you're standing from afar, you actually, and this is all by a sense of coincidence that these artists also, we didn't have a theme that we presented it with. They came up with an impulsive response to the place. And what you see here is a sort of like thermal reaction in the demonstration of this artwork. Can move forward. So again, the sense of scale in the place. And from both angles of the artwork, there are distinctive ways of seeing it. And of course, it plays on opness, but on an optical kind of illusion. But really, the most important part is that it becomes, it transcends to something that sensorially absorbs something further with the landscape. And we move forward. This is the work of Zainab El-Hashmi. It's called Camouflage. There's a mistake in the spelling here. Apologies. And it basically plays on the idea of the camel. So she's used in these various geometric shapes that she's been investigating for many, many years. Zainab is an artist from the United Arab Emirates, and she's done a lot of installations and sculptures. And with these pieces, really, she's thought of like, she's used the camel hide in its various aspects. And this camel hide is usually discarded. Many parts of it are utilized for various purposes and industrial purposes, but many parts are also discarded. And she works with the discarded material, safeguarding it and kind of transforming it here. And really the idea of it is thinking about where, there's a lot of associations of camels with the desert, etc., but there's a lot of tropes and stereotypes. And these various objects and this entire installation becomes as a sort of geometric, I want to say, redaction into what is the landscape and what these camels think. They become like, as if they're like DNA formations that resonate with the landscape that mimic, that tease the landscape, that also are completely camouflaged with the landscape. And these issues of mimicry, bowing to, allowing the landscape to overarch and overcome, I think these were a lot of the aspects that, they're sometimes in complete dissonance to how artists actually navigate in various other places. In an exhibition format, many artists don't want necessarily any other artworks to overcome their practice, to bleed into it. And this is a very different way for these artworks to kind of exist in this space and time. And let's move forward. You can see the sense of really kind of, here you see the details of it. And the artworks were not in any way or shape meant to be perfect, or, there is a sense of incompleteness. And I like that. I have to say, they're temporary. Their onus is about the moment. Their onus is for that kind of living experience. And they carry with them all these imperfections. Let's move. This is Alicia Quad's work in Blur, which is quite superb. I mean, these are this installation of various structures, kind of architectural frames, and at the same time mirrors. And she placed them in conjunction to some of the plants, and the rocks, and they reverberated. It felt as if that place, that moment of time, and this is why the title was also very appropriate in Blur, because it captured time. It captured us, the moment, the time, the natural landscape, all in one element. It felt that it even captured a sense of quietness in that extended landscape, in this cavern that her artwork was present in. Let's move forward. And here you see, again, this kind of aspect of the interaction of people. And just a note to say that this exhibition was obviously for free. It was open to the public and accessible, and it was only for a duration of 6 weeks. So quite a limited time. And at the same time, the exhibition was mostly manned by young Saudis who we called Hukat al-Fan, so the storytellers. And there was over like 35 young men and women that were all trained to be the storytellers, to talk to the audiences, to interact with the various school trips and visits and people that came to the space. And their experiences were quite remarkable at the same time. Let's move. This is Sultan bin Fahad's desert kite. And literally, it's like a keyhole that exists. And he was inspired by methodologies of building that existed in Al-Ula and in various desert landscapes, which are about these, the use of adobe or these mud formations that stand the test of time. And these shapes are shapes that you actually see in the desert landscapes that had existed from again, thousands of years. And there are various interpretations of this idea of the desert kites, that they were about entrapment of, for capturing animals at the time. And he plays with it to think about mythology and the capturing of dreams. And there's an urn in the middle of the space that serves as a place for some of the mythological figures that exist on the tombs in Al-Ula, that he has them in a sort of like water-like urn, and they appear like shadows. So you only see them when you're really in the space, and they barely appear. So the Sphinx and many of these representations And to give you some context, so it's a place where the Nabateans largely, or the extended civilization of the Nabateans lived in Al-Ula, from Petra into the Al-Ula area. And their tombs are quite remarkable. And they hold a lot of these visual references and codes. And at the same time, unfortunately, after specifically 1979 in Saudi, with the advent of more, let's say, stringent Islamic political policies that took place, and I want to took hostage of the country, there was even an attempt to destroy these representations in the tomb. So the heads were cut of the sphinxes, and the various kind of emblems that were on these tomb formations. And so in many ways, the artist is not acting, he's acting in a very, I want to say, quiet way to salvage the story, to salvage this sense of figuration and the sense of the essence of this place. So he puts it in that urn as a way to do that. And what's quite remarkable, if we move forward, I think we have a close-up here. So this area where the urn is an area of contemplation. It actually frames the sky and becomes a place of silence and solitude for people that are part of this. Let's move forward, please. And this is, I just want to give you a sense of really the grandeur of the place, the positioning of these artworks. Again, to say that a lot of these installations, both in response to the place, are part of their own vocabulary. They are coming in with plenty of, let's say, topics that are urgent to a lot of the various artists. And in the end of the day, they are temporary structures. And that's something I feel quite at ease with. Let's move forward.
We'll have 5
this
minutes,
is
yeah.
Reem? I mean, I'll end with this particular project. I'll show you the rest very quickly, but in terms of explanations about this particular project, which is dear to my heart and brings me back to a lot of my own previous practice. This is Khalil Rabah, a Palestinian artist who presented this work called Grounding. And Khalil basically is bringing in olive trees, a lot that we know are many who are indigenous to Palestine, from the Jordanian basically landscape into Al-Ula, in the middle of this desert. And for people who don't know the story of Khalil Rabah's practice, he's constantly configured himself with the olive tree as an equal. So the olive tree is this living being for him. The olive tree, and you see it, it's very, very much, I want to say it's even a human size. And these olive trees here in this kind of communal grove are imported from elsewhere, positioned in this desert landscape, and are trying to thrive in this place. I can tell you they have been well taken care of, but they've actually, they've prospered, believe it or not, even within this landscape. And they in this kind of circular shape of theirs, they've withstood a lot of it. The story of these olive trees conceptually goes back to his previous practice, where he had sent 3 olive trees to Geneva in 1995 to the gardens of the United Nations, Ariana Park, and planted them there. After 12 years, as part of that, he went back to Geneva to look after, to go see what happened to the trees, found out that one tree only had stayed, but not in the gardens, was transplanted yet again into the botanical gardens, and but has thrived and prospered in the botanical garden. So he decided that he wanted to make a case in the courts of Geneva to ask for that this natural being, which is this olive tree, that apparently parts of the laws in Switzerland say that if a natural being lives for 12 years, does no harm to Switzerland, and in fact, gives back to the place, is allowed naturalization. So he was calling on naturalization, and he said in the case, in this legal case, that in the case that it's not granted naturalization, then this tree deserves its right of return. And of course, it plays here on a lot of political terminologies related to the Palestinian plight, but not just. I think at this time and stage, it talks to a lot of issues that are hinged on thinking of both migration, displacement, naturalization, and most importantly for me is this this equalizing form between us and that living thing of the tree. And just to very briefly, if we can go Gayatri or through the images, just to indicate and show the rest of the artworks and the rest of the installations. These are aerial images of that olive grove. Work by Abdullah Al-Uthman made of steel that showcases like a mirage in the landscape, geography of hope. This is a close-up of that rippled steel. Jim Denovan's aerial view of his installation that is only made out of these sand mounds, which is basically a calendar of 365 mounds in various shapes and forms that he did with the entire community. It's called an angle of repose, because when you are in the middle, you see the entire, you can only see the entire kind of aspects. And interestingly enough, all 7 mounds kind of exist together, and they form this kind of sense of community of sand together, basically. This is it from where you're standing. Dan Awartani is where the dwellers lie, made out of stone, a geometric structure that can be inhabited. Many of these are actually our storyteller ladies that were part of the Hukat al-Fan, that used it also to take a lot of photos. And this is Shizad Dawood's Coral Alchemy. Let's move forward. There's quite a few other projects. I know we're out of time. Monica Sosnovska's Silent Witnesses of the Past. These are made from the ruins of the various train tracks that existed in this location. Shadia Alam's I have seen thousands of stars and one fell in al-ula. It's kind of evident, but the most important thing is that the star is, instead of dreaming about the stars want to be part of this landscape and just be in harmony with the surrounding, reversing this gaze and reversing this idea of domination. Sheikh al-Mazdrou's beautiful project of these measuring the physicality of void. You see these inertia, really the epitome of the idea of inertia, with these metal pillowed like structures of copper that she wedges into these cavities and creates a sense of like pull and push between them. And Stephanie Doomer's Under the Same Sun, which is an installation that she uses the solar power and creates basically a place where plants grow in the middle of it under this cavernous area. Let's move forward. And the last work is Ayman Zidani, The Valley of the Desert Keepers. And it's just the use of ropes around this landscape. And there's a sound piece to it, which narrates the names of the flora and fauna as sort of, and actually has microphones that pick up the steps of people that come into the space, so it chimes with it. So and he talks about these flora and fauna of the desert landscape as having the genetic formations of the history of the place. So it's a reverberation of that, and comes with this acacia tree as a sort of a celebration of sorts. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reem. This was can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yes? Okay, great. Well, a really breathtaking presentation and a lot to think about. Because we have limited time, I'm going to just rush and dive straight into the questions. And also, for everyone attending, please write in your questions in the chat box. I'm going to pick them up as we go along. So, Reem, a very compelling presentation against alienation, the alienation that today's time is especially producing, and sometimes even technological alienation with the kind of segregations being enforced, infrastructurally, technically, and socially. And I can see the case you're making about exploring equity that the desert produces between place, matter, community, and ecology within what you describe as a larger phenomenological order. And I liked how you kind of outlined the space of contradiction in the desert, where a place which is a place where mirages, disappearance, illusions, and the social cohabit in a way. And the first question I actually want to ask is straight into the specific project, and then we kind of zoom out into larger questions that you generally tackle with. And my first question is about the desert and your specific project here. In terms of how you approach the desert and this landscape within a larger kind of panoramic view that we've had around Orientalism. Because there's a long legacy of desert landscapes in Orientalism, which in the 21st century also meets sci-fi. So we're in a very curious moment where Orientalism meets sci-fi, and you can see a lot of discussion happening in West Asia around a kind of new romanticization of this landscape, including Alula, around the sci-fi. And it's no coincidence that the most dominant imagery for this kind of art and this project is drone shots. And it's also no coincidence that usually in most of these photographs, people are missing. And knowing that people are so central to your practice, I'd love to hear more about how you thought about this project, what contemporary art does to this wider kind of discourse of Orientalism meets sci-fi, meets drone shot, meets Dune.
I love the question. I love it when I'm provoked, honestly. I think it's fantastic, Sabia. I think, what I loved about working on Desert X is that it was precisely that we could finally reclaim and take ownership of a space that has been hijacked for so long. A natural phenomena that is very much part of our entire vocabulary in the Arab world in particular, and a part of embedded in our cultures. And I was raised in the Gulf. I remember my own outings with my family in the evenings, because it's much cooler to go out and go into these outings in the parks, basically the desert as a park, in our cars, and where we had our meals and stuff. And it's a place for, people are not aware of how much of that living aspect is part of the desert in our lives. And for very much our contemporary times. I think in terms of, you know, the whole point of this project was to create an alchemy of sorts between saying this is an experience for art in this natural reserve, because it is a reserve, right? The entire place of Al-Ula is a reserve, so they do not allow, for example, high rises. They don't allow buildings, actually. Only like one story, even mud structures are what are allowed in Al-Ula at large. Tent or mud structures are the only thing that is allowed in terms of building in Al-Ula. So it's very much a natural reserve. And the experience of it is to say that this place is present. It has a voice. Its people are part of a larger, you know, sense of, I want to say, of agency for the country. And yes, it's it's becoming a major tourist attraction. Of course, this is not to undercut that this is part of a larger policy for, let's say, for the governmental powers that want this place to become on the advent of the economies of Saudi. But it's also a response to, you know, the larger landscape of both Medina, Al-Ula, and all the adjacent townships that are reliant on an economy. So we, you know, people think and associate Saudi Arabia for wealth, but in fact, there's a lot of poverty. You know, the people who work there, every single person is Saudi. This is not, you know, imported, let's say, labor from anywhere else. This is all the youth that are craving a sense of ownership in that place, and they're making the narrative. So I think that's also important to say this, right? That they're the ones who are owning their town. This is the place where that landscape really kind of configures. They want to see the art, they want to see the pop stars, they want to see the musicians, they want to be part of that viable sense. And that's, you know, you have a response that is coupling that. The aspect of this exhibition was purposeful, that I stood in front, you know, I did not want art that was, I wanted art that was humble. I wanted it to speak, you know, again, to when I said bow down to nature, I really meant it. You know, I wanted it to become intrinsic to the fabric. I wanted it to look into these pertinent issues related to the larger natural surrounding. So is it very much like the Bedouin life? Perfect. If it is, then I got the essence for sure. And that's not a culture that I, you know, shy away from, because I think it carries with it a lot of wealth and extremely important issues relation to, you know, let's say, permanence and ways of being in an ecology of space, which we have to reinvestigate and look into. And at the same time, definitely there were no tropes of, let's say, I was definitely shying very much away from the, and I think a lot of the artists didn't even think about it in terms of like, the stereotypes related to the desert landscape. In fact, if anything, they just responded to this incredibleness. You've caught on the sci-fi, which I think is that place, Al-Ula, it looks like it's in Mars. It's unlike any other, you know, a landscape I've been to in a long time. You know, even Petra doesn't, Ram or Wadi Ram that are adjacent from Jordan, they don't even compare to Al-Ula. There is a sense of magnificence, and at the same time, you know, the stone structures are, I don't know, you know, every time people are there, they think that they are looking at creatures, or, you know, there's a sense of like awe just in looking at that landscape. It's to be experienced fully, to fully understand it. it's sci-fi in its own essence, which is quite incredible. But to say that, like, that future is only hinged on that present, in a way that it's there for their people, which this is the thing that I respect the most. So it's you know, Muhammad and Uthman and the many young people that I worked with, that I felt this was for, you know, and their future is hinged on their present there. And that's the only thing that I can respond to in terms of thinking about. You know, it's not sci-fi. It's very much a reality. And in matters of thinking about, because you had multiple questions in that loaded question of yours, in thinking about you know, the way we had to experience the artworks, you know, you would not have seen the artworks in the shots that, I mean, the shots that I took of my experiences there. I'm like hugging the tree, you know, because I'm one-to-one with those. I didn't have time to upload my own images and put them. I mean, I had to like resort to what I found online for the more professional images of the entire artworks. But there's a lot that is, there's plenty one-on-one human versus, you know, and placement of people in that location. But it's also important to say that this is a place of scale. You know, we sometimes on a day, you know, they would count like 2,000 visitors, but you wouldn't see them at one given time because, you know, it's a place of magnitude. And we placed the artworks in various caverns, so it was a journey. People could, you know, either walk or, you know, trek or take various experiences to see these artworks. So it really kind of, it was a moment of repose for the individual, but it's really kind of carrying with it a lot that is still vibrant for that community. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Yes, thank you. It does. And my next question is going to be a segue into inquiring further, but I'm going to zoom out. So this is going to be more about your practice at large, not just about the Desert X exhibition. And that's to ask you about, what does the public signify for you today? And I ask this in light of a long genealogy of claims made about what constitutes a public. I mean, as academics, we've read about Benedict Anderson's print media creating a public sphere, all the way to, you know, larger political spheres of the welfare state, to the neoliberal idea of public as consumers and audience and target demographics today. But I also ask this in light of what we've witnessed over the past at least decade and a half around Arab Springs, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, the farmer protests in India, and so many others. So clearly there's a very volatile notion of the public that we might imagine today. And I wonder how you would define it in your practice, how you see it from project to project.
I mean, the way I see it is that if I had the choice, I would never do a project of art that is not in the heart of the public sphere. That's how I would, that would be my advocacy. And that would be my advocacy for every artist. I would say forsake the white cube, forsake the museum, you know, forsake these spaces at large, because don't work for them. Let them then commemorate if that's the way it is. But if we wanted to create something for viability, then it has to be in our understanding of the public and in the public sphere. This is the thing that I believe, you know, artists really need to respond to for today. It's very important that we feel that, I mean, the public for me is, again, a sense of this idea of the living art. So where I feel that I can cultivate a conversation, I can create something that becomes meaningful, maybe just to one person, but, you know, meanings are, you know, meanings are something that is a myriad that can exist in everything, right? And I think I would also define that the public is a place for dreams, dreams that are not, for anyone to be able to confine them. You talked about my thought process on freedom, and this is it. I mean, this is where the public is the epitome of free thought, of free being, of free existence. So I am someone who really wants to channel that as much as possible via, some of the institutions I've worked with, or the areas of the various exhibitions that I've worked with. And I'm starting to, I feel that I'm feeling a visual language for my own exhibitions that I own starting to come up even more prominently. And yeah, I mean, that would be the aspect of the public for myself.
No, that sounds perfect. And I have one more question. We're going to run out of time, and there are a few from the audience as well. But my last question was going to be, actually, it connects with what you've just answered, because you're defining or inventing terms around your practice as well, and around the dialogues you're having with artists. Some of which, of course, is strongly led by an impulse to decolonize the very edifice, infrastructures, and the terminologies by which we view art, by which art is seen and organized. How do you regard nomenclatures such as land art, public art, these kinds of, because I know that you're trying to dismantle the white cube, but I get a sense that you're also trying to dismantle these kinds of containers.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing.
I mean, there's only so many fights I can fight, but I mean, in terms of nomenclature, it's something that I've always kind of thought through it, because there are definitely legacies that come with that, right? So between thinking about public art or land art that is purist or formalist, or carrying with them that kind of legacy. I mean, that's part of the reason I've pushed for thinking more of a larger, all-encompassing format of thinking about living art, to apply it to that. But it can become also thinking about installations in various in situ structures. And mind you, when I say public art, when I say even public, or when I say living art, I don't mean just natural reserves again, right? I mean, people know me for this. Like, it might be in a historic center, right? Or in a house, or in an inhabited format. This is where I think the language of that art really kind of comes afore, and that the aspect of the nomenclature becomes more elastic, and becomes more giving. My background of thinking, this is something I've alluded to before once in a lecture, that from my very beginnings in 2004, while I was working in Palestine in the academy, and I really kind of give the I give the credit to two people. First, Munir Fashe, an educator from Palestine, who really, has advocated for rethinking structures of education in typologies of living aspects. So he's gone back to words in Arabic language like muthanna and mujawara that are replenished with communal attitudes. So, and this is part of the structure that we used when I was helping to formulate the International Academy of Art Palestine, which is, a small academy of art that now, no longer exists as an independent institution, but is now part of Birzeit University in Ramallah. But the academy thought of, this idea of the crit, for example, but we thought, what crit? What does that mean in Palestine? But the muthanna means in Arabic, it's not the singular or the plural, it's the two, the duo. So in Arabic language, we also have in grammatical formations the distinction of the two. So we say, we indicate the plural, like, for example, bint, banat, meaning bint is one for the singular, banat would be plural for girls, but we say bintain for two girls. So we have that indication. And this is something that now is pretty extinct in a lot of languages. And that salvaging of the duo as an entity is something quite beautiful. If you think of the reciprocal kind of relationship of the duo and no hierarchical kind of formation. So can't the crit be a duo, like in conversation? Can't mujawara means neighboring? Can't we just have, meetings that are about mujawara, or to go in relation to other places, visit places as a way of mujawarat, to learn and to be together with? So this kind of thinking about nomenclature was really essential in that derivation for the formation of this educational institution that I was part of, and I was inspired by him to apply it immediately in that practice. And the same for my second person that I give credit to is Geeta Kapoor, because she was very much part of the logic of thinking about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project, where I have been working on for a long period of time, for thinking about the collection and building the narratives of the collection. And very simply, you alluded to this, but it's really Geeta's, the reference of the Middle East was something that we wanted to shy away from. And decolonizing that name and that reference was very much her suggestion on saying you have to reference it in its geographical aspect as West Asia, because that's the correct denomination. And we have applied it ever since. And I've applied it then on my own practice and then on my let's say mandate of expertise. So I think it's essential to be able to do that, because again, we've inherited a lot that comes from, as you aptly put, from very much colonial setups and neo-colonial setups that need to be broken into.
Thank you, Reem. Reem, we're running out of time for Q&A now, but just out of due respect to the audience members that have asked questions, I'm going to quickly just at least read out all three of them in an order which I think might make sense, and you can see how you might want to answer. We'll have to keep the answer a little brief if possible. So the first two questions are actually by artists who I'm familiar with. There's Murugen Rathod. He's asked a question, who's a sculptor and actually works quite a bit outdoors as well. And he's commented about how amazing the presentation was, as well as the works. Are all these sculptures permanently installed in the desert? Because some of them are made out of materials like camel leather, and if not, then what would be their future? I'll go to the second question.
They are not meant to be permanent. Some of them will remain for a time being, but they're not meant to be permanent. The majority are not. Only a very select few will remain for a duration of time, but these are not artworks for permanent display.
And their future would be probably going back into some form.
No, a lot of it will be dismantled.
Got it. Okay, then there's a question from Anupam Roy, also an artist based in New Delhi. And well, I think he's still in New Delhi, and a lot of his work is in fact around protest sites, and his work responds to various political movements that are happening in the country. And he writes that when you discuss about nature and its relationship within a continuation you mentioned about mining, most of the art objects made out of resources of mining, like steel, stone, and so on. Is it a conscious choice? If that, then how does nature not get alienated from this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important question, because in the end of the day, yes, I mean, the aspects of the materials are mined for sure. These are, but I have to say at least one thing that happened is that they didn't mine from Al-Ula. Let's put it that way. That place was not safeguarded, but many of the, for example, there are stone pieces or the steel pieces, the aspect of, for example, the large steel piece would not be, it would be recycled use. So it would not be, it would be salvaged in a different kind of way. Yes, I mean, is there an inherent contradiction? I mean, it's pointing to this issue of mining for sure. Is there an inherent contradiction? I think this is something that even our very existence has an inherent contradiction, unfortunately, with everything that is anti-ecological, from the use of your bathroom to everything else. But it's part of that vocabulary that we have to contend with.
And the last question from Marilyn Abhimanyu, who asked that, was the community also participating in this project?
Yes, the community was, as I mentioned very briefly, but just to extrapolate, it was very, very much part of it, from the setup to the drivers, to the builders, to fabricators of these artworks. Many of them were the youth that are there. They are part of the larger community that of both staff and interns and hires of the Royal Commission in Al-Ula. They're mostly young people that are from Al-Ula or surrounding areas. And they really rely on these happenings in Al-Ula as a source of income and support for them and their families. So these are the people, if you visit there, these are the people that you would encounter. Very much part of the Saudi framework. And they were also quite incredible to work with for the purposes of making these art and making these experiences really meaningful. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Reem, that's the last question from the audience, and I'm going to now just formally thank you. This was extraordinary, a fantastic presentation and very, very uplifting dialogue, and also a lot of things that I'm going to think about after your presentation. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Sabih. Thank you for that.
I think a lot of us are going to look forward to keeping in touch with you. I'm going to hand it over to Gayatri now, and she'll take forward the award ceremony. So on that note, thank you again. And thank you everyone for listening in to this conversation. Please stay on for the award ceremony announcement and the statement from the jury.
Thanks, Sabih. Thank you, Reem, for a stimulating and thought-provoking lecture and presentation. And our thanks and appreciation to Sabih Ahmed for chairing an engaging discussion. I would now like to invite the jury members of the 2022 SSAF Installation Art Grant, Suresh BV and Natasha Jinwala, to join Reem. It's my pleasure to introduce Suresh and Natasha. Suresh BV holds an MA in painting from Royal College of Art, London, a post-diploma and diploma in painting from Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Baroda, and formal art training from Kent School of Arts, Bangalore. He is taught at MS University, Baroda, as full-time faculty and is currently the head of Fine Arts Department, SN School, University of Hyderabad. Suresh has held several solo shows, including Canes of Wrath at the Kochi Biennale, Kochi Muziris Biennale 2018, Chronicles of Silence 2015 at Vadera Art Gallery, New Delhi, and Sumukha Gallery, Bangalore, Khamoshi Ki Dastan 2015 at Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda, facilitating The Beast in 2006 at Vadera Art Gallery, New Delhi. He has participated in international and national group exhibitions, which include Hong Kong Art Fair, China, Destination Asia, a non-strict correspondence at Almaty, World Social Forum at Nairobi, and Video Art South Africa. Aesthetic Bind, Cabinet Closet Wonder Kammer at Kemold Gallery, Mumbai, Back to School at Tao Gallery, Mumbai, and Palette Gallery, New Delhi, Mechanisms of Motion at Anant Art, New Delhi, Are We Like This at the Vadera Art Gallery, New Delhi. Suresh has also done several collaborative projects with fellow artists and theatre persons, illustrated children's books, participated in art camps, and conducted numerous workshops on video and intermedia in colleges. Natasha Jinwala is a curator, writer, and editor based in Colombo and Berlin. Jinwala is associate curator at Gropius Pau, Berlin, artistic director of Colombo Scope in Sri Lanka, and the 13th Gwangju Biennale and Daphne Ayas 2021. Jinwala has curated Contour Biennale 8, Polyphonic Worlds, Justice as Medium, and was part of the curatorial team of Documenta 14 2017. Since joining Gropius Bao in 2018, she has curated a number of exhibitions, including survey shows of Bani Abiti and Akinbot Akinbi. Other recent projects include Shadow Circus at Savvy Contemporary with Bonaventure So Beijing. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me for pronouncing this name incorrectly. Arrival Incision, Indian modernism as peripatetic itinerary in the framework of Hello World. Revising a collection at Hamburger Bahnhof Museum for Gegenwart, Berlin. 2018 riots, slow cancellation of the future at IFA Gallery Berlin and Stuttgart 2018. My East is Your West at the 56th Venice Biennale 2015 and Corruption, Everybody Knows with Efflux, New York 2015. Jinwala was a member of the artistic team for the 8th Berlin Biennale for Contemporary Art 2014 and has co-curated the Museum of Rhythm at Taipei Biennale 2012 and at Museum Zutki Lodz 2016-2017. Jinwala writes regularly on contemporary art and visual culture. Recent co-edited volumes include Stronger Than Bone, Archive Books in Gwangju Biennale Foundation, and Knights of the Dispossessed, Riots Unbound, Columbia University Press. I now invite the jury for the 2022 Installation Art Grant to make their statements and announce the recipient of the 2022 SSAF Installation Art Grant.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't done. Thank you for the introduction. And it's a pleasure for us to be a part of this grant. I would like to read the jury statement that we've drafted. We would like to begin by thanking the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation for this generous grant to not only support artists, but instigate much needed debates and opportunities to push art processes forward. We would like to also congratulate the applicants for their thoughtfully formulated artistic project proposals. Their propositions served as a poetic lens on many critical issues from all over India, from investigating indigenous and gendered practices to responding to ecological disasters and even political issues. Most importantly, the reach of this grant was commendable. We received grants not just from the metropolitan centers, but also from different regions of the country, especially the Northeast and South India. Artists responded to the urgent calls of their communities and even formulated ideas that were an answer to those various plights. Saying this, the key point we looked for in the awarded artwork was those that went beyond questioning and the documentary. The awarded work provided poetic answers and proposed possible futures. It also did not forsake a deepened sense of aesthetic justice, care, and an urgency to give back. For all the mentioned above is a testament that this grant becomes a vehicle to reimagine the social potential of art in present-day India while making it accessible intellectually and in practical means, all the while creating a lasting impact on history. And with no further ado, we would like to announce that the winning grant was by Anga Art Collective for their project entitled Granary. It is a beautifully conceived idea that manifests on vitality and imagines creating an in-situ installation that serves as a flexible library complex inspired by indigenous architectural elements of the Baral to take place in Assam. In the words of my fellow juror, Suresh Bivi, the proposal stood out for its collective, inclusive, sustainable, and impactful practice. It has deeply held, clearly articulated notions of belonging to the world of rural ecosystems, cultures, and ephemeral natures. Also, the project very sensitively and intelligently framed thoughtful concerns for human, animal, and natural systems. Anga's practice is long in its duration, collective in terms of its operations and outreach. It is institutional, pedagogically expansive, and sustainable for future generations. Natasha Jinwala, our fellow juror, also added that from the immense range of artistic proposals made for the SSAF Installation Grant 2022, many of which took up daring and collaborative forms, Anga Art Collective's approach is remarkable for the way it encompasses the decentralized modes of expression, delving in knowledge building, vernacular architecture, and an eco-political confluence. Their focus anchors how agrarian practices, pedagogic resources, and living amidst non-human agents converge to shape aesthetic processes. It also generates a material provocation toward the role of installation art itself and toward its forced longevity. Instead, there is an intention to engage organic matter in transformative capacities. Anga Art Collective presented a well-researched and strikingly illustrated proposal that, when seen together with their recent projects, underscores a commitment to indigenous sovereignty connected to terrains they live and work within. Having pursued a communitarian mode with friendship as integral to evolving creative methods, their initiative is not only promising, but rather feels vital in an era of systemic collapse and social alienation. Thank you very much, and congratulations to Anga Art Collective.
A few members of the Anga Art Collective have joined us this evening. Dharmendra Prasad, who's in Hyderabad, Chandan Borgohain from Guwahati, and Dhrubajit Sarma, Pallov Saikia, Mayur Rajbongshi, Sanjib, Kalita, and Ankan Dutta, who are in Dibrugarh. I'd request the members of the Anga Art Collective to please say a few words.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, here myself, Dharmendra Prasad. It's a surprise. So I see this gesture of believing in our practice as an extension of trust and strengthening our belief in the collective forms and practices in the paradigm of the individualism. As we locate ourselves in wounded histories, fractured geographies, intense oralities, contested forests, fragile life, and decaying ecological time. So the ecological time is interrupted by industrial time, resulting in conflicts, climate catastrophe, bloodsheds, and suppression. Therefore, the collective for us is a tool to navigate in this complex landscape. It is also a tool to begin the counter narrative of thinking and imagining art practices, as well as to face the challenges of ethical deterioration in and outside of the studio space. Therefore, we would like to thank jury member for extending this trust on this power of collective innocence, integrity, and long friendship. The collective unfolds through uncountable disagreements, debates, laughter, fun, mistakes, at the backdrop of certain vision and ideological positioning. For example, risk, informality, and friendship define our collective imaginations and actions. Sense of location, deterioration of collective forms in the community context, and uncertainty of life, which drives us to be collectively resilient and in this uncertain time. So thank you again to all the jury members and everyone for this. Now, like Chandan and Dhruva and other people can speak.
Yeah, hi everyone. Am I audible? Yeah. So hi everyone, and a big thanks to everyone like SSAF and the juries, of course, for recognizing our work and the proposal that we have shared. And like Dharmendra has said, like it is a very surprise moment for us, and like it's a big moment for us also. And we thank the like as regarding the collective itself, Dharmendra has almost said everything. I just want to add a little line or a little note that apart from the projects that we have been doing and the results that and the end results that come up with, one of our most prior thing is the very idea of working together itself, to work together and to think together and to kind of build a dialogue with the place and the people that we go and work in. So this very like and like our jury member in her speech also like have echoed these concerns of collective engagement rather than individual and alienated forms of practice. And while listening to her, I personally felt, and we also as a collective, kind of resonates with the with her words and her thoughts that she had shared, and it feels very encouraging, like for us. And I just want to like we'd like to like take this grant also, like we since this very we have been working or like priority has been this uh, collective engagement, and we take this grant also as an affirmation of our belief in that collective spirit. So yeah, that's from me.
Thank you, everyone, and the jury member and Sher-Gil Sundaram Foundation. So, Dharmendra has already mentioned and about like what we are thinking as a collective. So, adding to their note, we like want to say like like in the context of Assam and Northeast India, like this collective is the only option for us. And without that collective, like we cannot work. The way we want to work, the collective is the only option. So, and we belong from a kind of community and society, which is like the society has already that collectiveness, and we like want to go like carry forward that in our practice, and that only can be like the practice only can be realized through the collective form and collective approaches. And thank you for believing in our practices, and this grant will help us to imagine and extend our projects and work.
No, I just want to like say thank you to Sher-Gil Sundaram Foundation and jury members, and yeah, and as Dharmendra, Chandan, and Dhruva said, yeah, we are like we are doing collective. We believe in collective practices. Like though we are individual, and the place we are coming from is a community. Like we come from a community life. We saw that in the village. We are all from the village, so we have that, and we want to work. And thank you all.
Many congratulations to the Anga Art Collective. I now invite Vivan Sundaram, the co-founder and managing trustee of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, and this is a very memorable afternoon, evening. I can only say that I've been introduced to this Anga Art Collective by one member, Dharmendra Prasad, who I met at the 5 million projects at the Goethe Institute. And I wasn't going there that often because I was not well, but Geeta and I entered his wonderful, what shall we call it, beautiful, large structure made of informal material and glass. And he spoke so eloquently that that was something that I really remembered. In fact, I didn't know that something like the Anga Art Collective existed. I don't often look at biodatas, but I was very pleased to be able to talk to him briefly and to know about the project. I'd like to say that the installation art grant, has literally expanded. I mean, the last grantee, a very dynamic artist, metropolitan artist, decided to go to the prehistoric moment and in a very dynamic way, unearthed, I'm using the word, uh, that past in a very powerful expressionist sculpture and other forms and put it out in the Jhangi Nicholson Art Gallery. So that was really, let's say, art in the white cube. But there is a certain notion that installation art, has to actually not be an art that is in the art gallery. And if I can quote Anish Kapoor, who said that any installation art which can be moved from one place to the other is not installation art. He said installation art is really what is site specific. What's interesting here is that the site specificity of the Anga project, is more than the famous uh, word or slogan called art in the or sculpture in the expanded field, which was proposed about 50 or 60 years ago. And here this expanded field is actually a collective, and that this collective works very strongly on the ground with materials. But what's fascinating is that the collective has organized itself uh, through thinking, through thought, and each one, I'm sure, has been growing extraordinary well, because today there is a strong relationship between making art and thinking art and maybe theorizing about it. And I think that the Anga Art Collective has been, the 12 members, I believe you are, have been, in fact, a wonderful. 12 is a perfect class, if I can say. And you have been teaching each other, as often happens when you're in a postgraduate course, that you become actually the teachers, and the teachers are actually put to the side. So you as a collective are really in an extraordinary way growing and remarkable. I mean, I had no idea that you started in 2010 and you have not broken. I mean, I'm sure there have been problems, but the fact that you survived and you're so much of a presence through a very different dynamics. If I can just quickly, we did a project in our thing about Majuli, about the area between Bangladesh and Assam, that river area, which just keeps on disappearing, Majuli. And there was water, everything was disappearing. And here, this project is about the land, about fragility, about the elephant, about a whole relationship, very much in a very special classroom thinking and going out of the class. And I'm sure that that your work will be recognized globally. And as you know, that the next document, in fact, I asked somebody, Latika Gupta, that has the award for the for the documenta, have they been selected by the famous Indonesian group? And she said yes. So, but I think that they are also a group that believes in a large amount of pedagogy, and that they would be very open. And I'm posing this question to Natasha, who's well connected and known to people in the documenta from her previous connection, that actually the word, it's not to network, but to show that in remote places, and not to romanticize it, that because you're actually not romanticizing your context, you're theorizing it and you're engaging in pedagogy. And it's just remarkable that your spirit and your thoughts will continue to grow. And if you feel that the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, in its second giving its second installation grant, will help you, then we are really pleased and honored that this special committee so unanimously selected you and that you will go and continue to be in the forefront.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vivan. Good evening, I'm Latika Gupta, and I work at SSAF as Director Projects. And on behalf of the foundation, I'd like to express our gratitude to the jury for the SSAF Installation Art Grant 2022. Suresh, Natasha, and jury chair Reem, thank you so much for your time and the thoughtful deliberations about all the applications. Thanks also to Reem for the lecture and Sabi for the provocative discussion. We'd also like to thank all the applicants for the grant for sharing your work and trusting us at SSAF and also the jury with your proposals. This evening, of course, is Anga Art Collectives. A huge congratulations, and we look forward to your journey over the next 18 months and longer. And before we end, I'd like to introduce our colleagues at SSAF. Saurabh Sheel, Archives Manager, who has designed the graphics and handled all the technical aspects for this event, along with Malvika Madkulkar, Assistant Editor, Publications and Communications, who's worked on all the communications as well, and Santosh Sani, our Accounts Executive. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope to see you again and also request you to check out our website, ssaf.in, and follow us on social media for updates about upcoming programs. Good night.